There are so many people that have been inspiring to me personally, and because in 2003 we sold our pizza restaurant that we had had for about 5 years in Phoenix, and it was right before the land invasion in Iraq. And a lot of supporters, I can, blah, blah, blah with the media and the talking heads and slap them around a little bit. I've been, a political activist, so I was capable of doing that. And they were like, look, we're going into war. There's going to be a land war. We got to have somebody anti-war on the radio or something. So it just happened to fall, and I just let it be known. A lot of the radio stations that I'd, done shows at before and so on with hosts said I was available. We're looking for sponsorship. Boom. Some guy got sick or died or something. I got the morning show out of KXAM. Then it went on to other ones and other ones and other ones. It was an opportunity for us to express in a major media market that hadn't been done before. So what do? I want to emphasize that, one, I'm not alone. You're not alone. There are a bunch of people out there doing this kind of stuff that just need attention or access to you even though they're there. That was 2003. February 2003, right before we went into land invasion in Iraq. When I did that, I could see that there was a hunger for this, that all of the suppression by the media that he's talking about I saw it. I'm at the newsroom, big story news coming into the whatever, and here's a talking points from Rush Limbaugh and the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee of which station I was on Air America as a token libertarians, and then, on the conservative shows and independent stations and so on. During that time, as we're learning a lot of stuff for being an activist, I hear of Larken Rose. Larken Rose had a little, if you ever see on DVDs, they have the big circle and then they got a little circle. You guys ever see the little circle? That's for many DVDs. There's these little DVDs that you can put in there. Well, there was a section in the IRS code that Larken was, you lying sacks of snot. You guys are liar, liar, pants on fire, blowing up all over the place. I am challenging this. And eventually it got down to they going, yeah, well, you may be right, but guess what? You're doing time in jail. And if you don't, agree and not appeal and be a good little boy, we'll let your wife do a year after you get out so your daughter doesn't go in foster care. You sons of man, somebody got to pay something. So what do? Well, Larken goes in, finishes out his philosophy, writes down a lot of stuff to eventually become books. It's got a whole mission plan. And what it was that it was us. It wasn't them. We were the problem. And so many different ways that he's done to be able to articulate this. So I have him get on the show, man. It's a Larken thing, man. It's Larken today. We're going to learn something. Well, what happens is when people find out they're not alone and they're able to articulate this stuff. Well, there's a bunch of his projects. I'm sure he'll tell you something about them. But the most recent is the Jones Plantation, which came from a short story that he had done to try and equate and get people to understand we're slaves. The 14th Amendment didn't free the blacks. It enslaved everybody else. It was just, it's a concept that we got up here that we have to worry about. Jones Plantation movie came, they premiered it at an Acapulco. I saw it then. They had it at Porcupine Freedom Festival. Hopefully you'll pay your $10 or whatever. You can go watch it. But the thing is that it's so inspiring and illuminating to people that need to be illuminated. That's what I wind up doing a lot, is illuminating the luminaries like Larken on the show. He's going to enlighten you again today. I am absolutely certain, but it takes your individual effort and participation to viral, share, be part of the solution. Because just sitting here listening, you're not part of the solution. You're just sucking up my oxygen. Just FYI, So this is why this coming together and actually coming up with a plan on your own to do something. And if a bunch of people join you, it's probably a pretty good idea. But a lot of times they don't see your idea. Every idea works. It's just how much. Well, who's making big ideas work a lot? Larken Rose.
My name is Larken Rose, and I'm a weird fringe kook freak. Now, is there anything more awkward than having to talk to somebody who has some weird beliefs that don't match what you think, and they're desperate to tell you all about it, and it's usually uncomfortable. It's also usually pointless because you're not really listening to them. You're maybe smiling and nodding if you're being polite about it, but mostly you're just looking for a chance to escape because you don't care what they think, because you think, well, this is some weird thing I don't really care about. And you don't believe what they believe. And by the way, they probably don't care what you think either, because you're just their latest victim of, I'm going to throw my ideas at you to try to talk you into what I think. So it's kind of pointless and awkward for everyone involved, and annoying and boring and irritating. Yeehaw. However, sometimes you or we are the weirdo freaks to the rest of the world. And I say that in particular about this crowd. And we have to understand what it takes for other people to give a crap what we have to say, instead of just thinking, we don't care and you're kind of nuts and please go away. So I will start here by proudly admitting that compared to the rest of the world, I am a weirdo freak. For one thing, I'm an anarchist. Now, I don't own any black ski masks, and I've never made a single Molotov cocktail. Bit antisocial, or at least asocial. That's actually the correct term. But that's just because I'm an introvert who regularly gives talks to crowds of people. So it's a little weird, but whatever. To a lot of people, I'd say to the most of the world, anarchist has this connotation of, well, you must want every man for himself, and survival of the fittest, and might makes right, and Mad Max, and zombie apocalypse, and violent chaos. Well, I hate to break it to you, but I don't believe in any of those things. I don't want any of those things to happen. I am a huge fan of human organization and voluntary cooperation. I'm a huge fan of technology and progress. I don't want to return to caveman ways. Thank you very much. If you do, that's okay. I'm not going to stop you. And most of all, I believe in peaceful coexistence. Peace on earth, goodwill to men, so on and so forth. So in that way, I'm kind of a boring goody-good as far as weirdo freaks go, instead of a bloodthirsty lunatic waving a black flag and hoping for the collapse of civilization. So sorry if that's a bit of a disappointment. But obviously, me liking peace and prosperity and cooperation and people being happy, that's not what makes me a fringe weirdo freak and outside of the mainstream. So what does? I want to go through a few things that I believe that do not match what most people believe. And each of you, whether here or watching this now or later, can, inside the quiet of your own brain, decide which pieces of this weirdo freak attitude you agree with and which you don't. And you might even change your mind on a couple things, but we'll see about that. So, am I a fan of law and order? No, not at all. Now, that may seem like a weird answer, given that I just said I like voluntary cooperation and organization and progress and technology and all that. So how could I possibly not be a fan of law and order? Well, let's start with the order part. I like organized, voluntary, peaceful order. That's awesome. One of the best examples of order I can think of, and I don't mean morally best, just the most order, is prison. It is very orderly. You know where you're going to eat. You know where you're going to sleep. You know what you're allowed to have. It is very precise and orderly, and it kind of sucks. So no, order is not automatically a good thing. Now, it can be, but the order of the, tyrannical regimes in history, there was lots of order under the KGB, Soviet Union, There was lots of order under Mao's Great Leap Forward while tens of millions of people were starving to death. They were orderly starving to death. They knew their exact tasks in the master plan. And then, of course, you have the fascists of Mussolini and Hitler who were renowned for how orderly and organized they were. Yeah, not a big fan of that kind of order. What about the law part? Now, this is a part where we get into stuff that most people never think about. They have these vague associations. Most people, when they hear law and order, or even just law, they think, oh, that's the thing that society makes to stop bad people from doing bad things and to protect innocent people. Yay, well, I'm all in favor of what you just described. It just happens to have nothing in common with law. There are occasionally a tiny, minuscule percentage of laws, edicts issued by governments and ruling classes, which actually say, like, don't steal and don't murder people. And I'm all in favor of stopping people from stealing and murdering. But the fact that those are bad is not because politicians sat down and wrote some legislation about it. Those were already bad. And it's just as bad when the politicians sit down and do what they do most of the time, which is write laws that say, you shall pay a tax of this much every time you wear a hat or go to the bathroom or any other thing I can think of, which is legalized theft. So no, law is not pro-freedom. It is not anti-theft. It is not even anti-murder. It is just the whims of politicians. But we are taught that this notion of law, like it isn't just people's threats, because if everybody says, oh, are you someone who proudly obeys the threats of the politicians? People would go, ew, no, like I might obey them if I don't think I could get away with it, if they have more guns than me, but no one's going to take pride in that. Well, what if we take that garbage and we call it law, and we talk about the law of the land, like it comes out of the dirt or something, and then we pretend that's something special. That's something superhuman. That's something magical. And if you don't respect the law, then obviously you're the scum of the earth. Well, I don't respect the law at all because I recognize it for what it is. It isn't like the essential nature of goodness. It's the arbitrary whims of psychopaths. So no, I'm not a fan of law. Now, I know some people use the term natural law to refer to how people should be, the natural order of things, natural morality, and things like that. The only reason I don't usually use that term is just because so many people associate law with lawmakers, legislators, human beings making up commands. You have to do this, you're not allowed to do that. And so I think for me, it just takes too much effort to try to describe for them. There's a thing called law that has absolutely nothing in common with what they always mean every time you hear the word law used by the talking heads on the formerly mainstream media. So a law is just a command. It's just a threat. It's a threat of violence. Now, I do believe occasionally threats of violence are justified. If someone's breaking into your house at 2 a.m. with an axe and you have a gun, I highly suggest you threaten to shoot them. And if that doesn't work, maybe you have to actually shoot them, which would be unfortunate, but whatever. So I'm not even against threats of force if they're justified. But whether something is legislated has nothing to do with whether it's morally justified. The vast majority of laws and regulations and decrees and edicts and all the other things they call their authoritarian garbage are absolutely immoral because they are acts of aggression. And that is the difference between what I want and what law and order actually is. Law and order is you will obey those people or will hurt you. Morality is you will respect the self-ownership of everybody else, or people have the right to make you respect it by defending themselves against you if you attack them or try to steal from them or things like that. So that kind of order, yeah, all in favor of that. The government kind, nope. So you can decide for yourself if you're a fan of law and order. I am not. I'm a big fan of voluntary, peaceful order, but that is never, ever the result of government. Second point on which I'm a weirdo freak extremist. Surely I believe in democracy. Hell no. And this is another one that makes people uncomfortable if they haven't yet thought about it. So a lot of people, when I first say, no, democracy sucks, they might think, oh, what do you want? Like a king or something? Because they've been, again, taught to associate democracy with this vague concept of the people have the power and goodness, and we all get together and agree on things. We all get together and agree on things is called consensus. That is not at all the same as democracy. For those who, I'm sure a bunch of you already know the distinction. For anybody who doesn't, democracy is 10 people hanging around and go, well, what should we do for lunch? And 7 of them will go, pizza? The 3 go, no, thanks. And the 7 go, too bad. This is a democracy. You will be forced to pay for your share of the pizza you don't want. That is democracy. Consensus is if all 10 agree, you do it. If 7 agree, maybe those 7 do it and the 3 do something else. It is individuals coming together and choosing, each individual himself, choosing to be part of an organization that does something, whether it's 10 people or 100,000 people. That is consensus, but so often the propaganda tries to pass off democracy as consensus, and it is not. Democracy is the majority violently dominating the minority. And I sort of hate to do this, but I have to use the cliche thing, and many people have used this. The perfect example of direct democracy in action is called gang rape. It's really damn evil. It's the majority imposing their will on a minority. And the fact that, oh, they voted, I don't care. That has nothing to do with morality. That doesn't in any way ever make anything moral or righteous or justified, which is why I think democracy is profoundly evil. Consensus, outstanding. Democracy, hell no. And most people aren't even clear inside their own heads what they're supporting when they say, well, yeah, we need to spread democracy. No, we don't. We need to spread freedom, and that is absolutely antithetical to democracy. And we never even get actual democracy. Actual democracy would be evil, but we get this distorted, weird, mangled version where you vote for something and somebody else decided what your votes meant and how many there were, and then they do whatever they want and pretend they represented you. So we got the fake version and the real version, and both of them are bogus anyway. So you can decide for yourself if you're a fan of democracy or not. I am not. Next point on which I'm a weirdo fringe freak. Are you proud of this country? Do you love your country? Flag and country. Are you a patriotic American? No, not at all. Again, the distinction I have to make has to do with the mushy stuff that's in most people's heads where they like something good, but they've been tricked into a label that means something that isn't what they actually like. So I'm going to describe what I actually like, which is not patriotism. And I want any patriotic people out there to tell me, okay, do you agree with me on this? Or do you agree with the people waving the flag? What does the flag stand for? Now, there's lots of people who will say the American flag stands for freedom. Well, that's funny. Why is the symbol of freedom on all the uniforms and the machinery of the warmongers violently? Why is it on every IRS office and every DEA office and every ATF office and every DOJ? Wouldn't you think they'd hate that if it meant freedom, since they're the exact opposite? But they fly that flag and they tell you it's freedom. But they also tell you to the republic for which it, the flag, stands. It's a ruling class. The flag represents the territory, a ruling class in a country. I know this is going to upset some people. A country is nothing more than the territorial jurisdiction of a national ruling class. That's all it means. But we're taught to believe, well, there's this vague thing called the country that you're supposed to love. Okay, well, what the hell is it? Is it the people? There's lots of pretty cool people here. There's lots of not so cool people here. There's also cool people outside that arbitrary line and not so cool people outside that arbitrary line. The place is pretty cool, but it doesn't suddenly become less cool if you go into Canada or down to Mexico or lots of other places. Why should I care about that particular line, that particular piece of dirt? What significance does it have? Is it pro-freedom? No. It's not even the freest territorial jurisdiction on the planet anymore. Not socially, not economically, not by any measure. But we are trained to love something we can't identify. Just like with democracy, we're trained to believe in something that we can't define. Law and order. We're trained to strongly have a belief about something and we don't even know what the hell it is. And that is indoctrination. And if you're being taught something that's actually true, and if you're attached to something that's actually true, for example, I absolutely believe in self-ownership, and I can tell you what it means, and I can describe why it's a good thing. It's an essential thing for peaceful coexistence, but it isn't just some vague label that I've been taught to worship. And sadly, democracy and law and order and patriotism are vague mush that take people's good intentions and trick them into mangling that into, I support the ruling class that claims the right to rob and control me. Because that's what it boils down to. Why are you waving the flag that represents the thing that claims the right to steal your money and boss you around and thinking that has something to do with freedom? And I don't condemn people for making that association because they're surrounded by a society that tries to make them make that association. But when I'm up here pointing out the things that make me a fringe extremist freak, I want each of you to consider, well, what is it you really love? If you say you love America, what is it? The idea of freedom? Cool. Love the idea of freedom. I love that too. I don't know why you would associate that with the symbol of a violent ruling class. It's not only violent here, it's violent all over the whole world. That's not freedom. Well, I love the people. Okay. All of them? Well, no. Okay. And does it exclude everybody outside? Well, no. Okay. Then why make that distinction? How about saying I love decent people and I like freedom and I like justice? Why would you bring in political concepts about ruling classes into describing what it is you care about? And it's because you were trained to do that. How many of us went to school? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the... Now, if you watch, and this is one of those things, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable because when you're indoctrinated into a certain, like you're patriotic towards that particular ruling class, well, we should be, and it's an emotional thing and all that. Okay. How about the people who grew up in Nazi Germany or the people who are in North Korea now? Should they feel profound love for the violent, domineering psychos who are bossing them around and killing people? Like, should they be patriotic too? Or is it only just by blind luck that we're in the one place that you should love your ruling class? Country. But these things make people uncomfortable because the things they care about that are actually righteous and actually good have been mislabeled as political things. Democracy, law and order, patriotism, love of country. In order to trick them into thinking if you are a good person, then you will love democracy and law and order, and you'll be patriotic and love your country and yada, yada, yada. And I'm here to uncomfortably tell people, if you're a good person, you have to reject all of those things because none of those things have to do with peaceful coexistence. None of those things have to do with freedom. And if deep down what you actually meant when you say, I love my country is I love freedom, good, hang on to the love of freedom and let go of the BS that's been attached to that throughout your life by society around you. And it's uncomfortable. I grew up sort of conservative, constitutionalist leaning statist, and I was totally patriotic. I supported the troops before I had any idea what they were doing. I supported the police before I had any idea what they really do. I had the Hollywood version of what they do is they're the righteous good guys saving the day. I've since learned that no, they're not. But it's very difficult to disassociate what you really believe in and what you really care about from the labels that have been stuck on them by opportunistic psychopaths. And I don't say that sarcastically. They are psychopaths. And they know they can't come to you and say, hey, can you cheer for us if we boss you around, steal your stuff and go kill people on the other side of the world? And steal resources here and overseas and all that. Do you mind if we do that? Are you going to go rah, rah, rah? Everybody would go, no, you're a psycho, please go away. They have to frame it in such a way so that the well-intentioned good people cheer for evil. And that is what politics does. And it did it to me. And I hate to admit it. I make myself admit this every time because I don't want to pretend I magically know everything. It's just you peasants who don't. I was still a statist back when the atrocity in Waco happened. And I was clueless enough and ignorant enough that I thought the people inside the compound were the bad guys. Now, they had weird beliefs that I don't agree with. Some of them did things that probably weren't that good, but they weren't anywhere near as bad as what the law enforcers did to them by terrorizing them and torturing them and then committing mass murder. I was cheering for mass murderers back then. I didn't know it. And that is the problem with political indoctrination in government. It's not that evil people do evil things. Of course they're going to, and we have to be on the lookout, and the decent people have to be ready and able to defend themselves against the evil people. It's that by way of lies, the evil people trick the good people into cheering for them. And if you, like, one of the most depressing things for me is you can look, it's easy to find images of Mao or Stalin or Hitler and the cheering, thrilled, happy throngs of people cheering them into power. Why? Because they promised if you give authoritarian power to them, they'll fight against those bad things happening. And by the way, they almost always were fighting against actual bad things happening. But the solution of, we'll give that guy authoritarian power instead, gee, that never turns out very well, does it? But they have to trick the decent people into cheering for things they don't understand. And the thing is, and many of you are in this uncomfortable position of trying to tell people there's a lot of things you are emotionally attached to that go contrary to who and what you really are. Because you've been taught to muddle these ideas in your head until you can't tell the difference between loving freedom and worshiping a ruling class, between wanting justice and cheering for the hired thugs of an authoritarian monstrosity. And so it's very difficult for me, especially talking to people who are of the mindset I used to be in. Wave the flag and support the troops and yada, yada, yada. Because they're not doing that because they like evil. They're doing that because they were taught that that's what it looks like to support justice and freedom. And that is not what it looks like to support justice and freedom. So the main punchline I will hit here, are you one of those anti-government extremists? It's funny for me as someone who is genuinely anti-government 100% start to finish, top to bottom, inside and out. I am absolutely anti-government, and it is hysterical for me to watch the ruling class point at tons of people who are not anti-government and accuse them of being me. No, I'm anti-government. They're not. They just want a slightly different flavor of authoritarian domination. Like the Trumpites are not anti-government. The left, the right, everything in between, voting for one form of ruling class, that's not anti-government. That's just bickering over what color shine you want on the boot on your throat. To be anti-government is, I don't want the boot on my throat or on anybody else's throat. And I am proudly anti-government because government is always and inherently anti-human. It cannot be anything else. I became an anarchist by accident. I was already libertarian leaning, and my first wife, Tessa, and I would talk back and forth because we like to philosophize, and I already liked to debate, even when I was still wrong about a lot of things. But I didn't like to debate and feel like my position was stupid. So I'd debate and go, those didn't really add up. I got to whittle this down. I whittled down my idea of what an ideal, legitimate, perfect government would be. And piece by piece, it was like, well, I can't force people to fund things they don't want. That's just extortion. And it can't do this. And it can't tell people you're not allowed to defend yourself. We'll defend you by way of robbing you first. And then, like, that's mafia lunacy. So I whittled it down until I said, this is the perfect description of government. and realized it's not government anymore. It's just people. It doesn't have special rights. It doesn't have authority. They're not lawmakers. They don't create laws. They just say stuff and they do stuff and they organize and they cooperate, and none of them have special rights. And so for those who still believe that, well, government can be a force for good, the concept of government is antithetical to humanity, and it absolutely destroys humanity, even in good people. And there's a reason for that. What does government, what does authority add to the equation? Let's say we have a bunch of people, they're, peacefully coexisting. Somebody says, well, we need authority in order to blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, what don't you need authority? You don't need authority to protect yourself. You already have the right to do that. You don't need authority or special rights or a badge to voluntarily organize some productive thing, whether it's a little thing or a gigantic operation. You don't need authority or a badge or special permission to use rightful defensive force to protect, a small area, a huge area, whatever. The only thing you need authority for is permission to commit evil. By definition, if it's something that's wrong for me to do and you to do and you to do and you to do, but it's right for somebody with a badge to do, all that badge means is permission to commit evil. That's all authority can ever add to society. By the very nature of what it is. Because if you say, well, that guy has the right to do blah, blah, the rest of us don't. Oh, so it's bad if I do it. It's bad if you do it. It's bad. But because of weird rituals and the costume and a badge and stuff, it's good if that guy robs you or bosses you around or does something. All government is permission to commit evil. That's all it can ever be. That's all authority can ever be. And obviously, that's not the way they do their sales pitch. We need authority to protect you and to act on behalf of the people. Okay, well, if you're acting on behalf of me, you only have the right to do what I have the right to do. And I don't have the right to rob my neighbor to fund something that I happen to want and he doesn't. Don't pretend you're acting on behalf of me when you rob that guy. And definitely don't pretend you're acting on behalf of me when you rob me to fund what somebody else wants. But that's the rhetoric they have to use. Now, in case I haven't offended everybody completely so far, do I at least believe in the Constitution? Absolutely not. Democratically elected constitutional republics with a Bill of Rights have been the most murderous regimes in the history of the world, bar none. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics had a constitution. It allowed the people to vote. It had a Bill of Rights. How did that work out for the Soviet Union? The Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, Democratic People's Republic, is a constitutional republic that allows the people to vote, and they have a Bill of Rights. How did that turn out? The Weimar Republic, which became Nazi Germany, was a constitutional republic which allowed people to vote, and it had a Bill of Rights. Red China, the most murderous regime in the history of the planet, the People's Republic of China, was a constitutional republic that allowed the people to vote and had a Bill of Rights. But letting the people choose and having a bill, how can that be bad? Because when they can pretend that you consented to it, that they're representing you when they do this evil lunacy, they get away with way more than if they're just some king that says, I do what I want. Tough. You'll deal with it. When we can be tricked into thinking they're our agents, they're doing this for us. We are doing it. We invaded Iraq. I didn't. I don't know about you. I wasn't there. But if they can get us into the mindset where we actually fall for that garbage, they can be far more abusive and tyrannical than somebody who doesn't even pretend to represent us, who just says, well, I'm a tyrant because I can get away with it. Look at all the thugs I have. That is why after the U.S. Constitution, first of all, the U.S. Constitution created the biggest authoritarian empire the world has ever known. So that's a pretty big oops. And again, in case I haven't offended enough people yet, for the people to say, well, we have to go back to what it was supposed to be. We failed it. It was a good idea. So constitutional republics, it was a good idea here and in the Soviet Union and North Korea and Nazi Germany and Red China and so on and so forth. It just didn't work right. It was a good idea that never works right when tried in reality. It's a good theory, but every single time we try to apply it to humanity, you get an authoritarian monstrosity. Constitutionalists are the same as communists. They believe in a crappy idea and they really want it to work. And it never does, and it always results in authoritarian violence. And by the way, I used to be one. And if former me was sitting in the audience, I'd probably be all offended and grumbling under quietly. No, we just have to do it right. But again, these things work because when they put it in the nice words, we're representing you. We're not dominating you. We're not oppressing you. We're doing the will of the people. Then people put up with way more. When they can rephrase it and rebrand it and pretend that, well, you chose this. We asked you whether you wanted the left boot or the right boot on your throat, and you chose one. So that counts as you consenting. Of course, no boot, no thank you. That wasn't on the ballot. That's never on the ballot. But you chose one of the boots, so it's your own damn fault. We're just representing you. We represent you. All right, who can name who said this? I'm going to get the quote as close as I can. The state is the coldest of all cold monsters, and from its lie this mouth crawls. I, the state, am the people. Nietzsche, good job. You win. And that has been true forever. The fact that it pretends to represent us and tells us that democracy is what we should strive for. No, it isn't. Law and order is what we should strive for. No, it's not. Patriotism and loving your country. No. Love the principles of freedom, self-ownership, justice, things like that. But that is never the same as loving a ruling class. The only thing that the belief in authority ever adds to society is more immoral violence. It's all it can add. Now, my book, Most Dangerous Superstition, goes through, as you can probably guess from this talk, the most dangerous superstition refers to the belief in authority and how that destroys humanity. It doesn't just empower bad people, like the lawmakers. Well, you were a corrupt psycho anyway, and it gave you power. The law enforcers, the book describes how it affects them. They no longer feel responsible for their own actions. Hey, I don't make the law. I just mindlessly enforce it violently against a bunch of people who didn't do anything wrong. You see that attitude everywhere. I'm just following orders. I mean, didn't we dispose of that in Nuremberg? But they still all say that. I'm not doing this. Some weird, vague thing called law is doing this. I just work for them. So don't blame me when I'm the one actually like bludgeoning you, shooting you, or putting you in a cage. So it destroys the humanity of the law enforcers. And what does it do to the voters? Left, right, anything in between. If they convince you that as long as you elect tyrants to rob all your neighbors, then it's legitimate, what are you going to do? You're going to vote for them to rob your neighbors to fund the things you think are important. So the left can say, well, I want my neighbors all robbed. Well, they're not going to think of it in those terms. To help the poor. Well, I'm all in favor of helping the poor. It's the robbery part I have trouble with. And then the right are like, well, I want to like defend the innocent, whether it's home or abroad from scary foreigners or scary people here. I'm all in favor of defending innocent people from scary people here and scary people abroad. Lots of them happen to wear badges, by the way. Not in favor of forcing anybody to pay for the government version of protection, which is the ultimate, irony of we're going to rob you because we need to do that in order to protect you from robbers. Like, you don't see a problem with your logic there? Everyone who votes. Now, I'm going to do a guilt trip. I'm almost done here, but the weirdo freak is going to guilt trip you. Anybody who has voted Democrat or Republican, Ernie mentioned that I spent just over a year in federal prison for misdemeanor willful failure to file. I didn't send them pieces of paper. That whole story, that's a different thing. Let me know. I'll send you a free PDF of the book I wrote about it while in prison. If somebody voted Democrat or Republican, and every once in a while they find out what happened to me and they go, oh, I'm so sorry. And I go, why are you sorry? Like, did you vote for the people in office? Well, yeah, some of them. Were you not aware that they impose taxes on people? Well, yeah. Were you not aware that if people don't do as they're told and pay tribute to the ruling class, bad things happen to those people? Well, yeah. So this is what you voted for, and you knew you were voting for this. Well, yeah, but the other, I don't want to hear about the other. You voted for the machine that did that to me to do that to me. And don't tell me, well, somebody else would have voted for them to be even worse. Okay, that's on them. That's not on you. And I usually withhold this guilt trip because it's a little bit harsh. But I basically tell people, I assume you're trying to be a good person and you're well-intentioned. And your belief in government directly resulted in you empowering people that robbed me into poverty and caged me for a year, not for hurting anybody, not for threatening anybody, but for not sending pieces of paper, not even the green pieces of paper, a white piece of paper, to the extortion racket. You were tricked into doing that. Now, if you want to cringe at the idea of being anti-government, okay. The reason I'm anti-government is I will never do that to another human being. I will never ask government to rob or forcibly control another human being in the way I have no right to do. I will never use the excuse of, well, it was left boot or right boot, and yeah, you ended up with the right boot on your throat. The other one would have been worse, so I voted for it. I have no right to do that to my fellow man, and they have no right to do it to me. I was in a parking lot in Phoenix where we live. Somebody comes up to me with a clipboard and, do you vote? And I was like, hell no. And I said, I'm not dumb enough to appoint a ruler over me, and I have no right to appoint a ruler over you. And he was just like, okay. So I think that was a little over his head, a little too much too soon. But that's the reality. I'm anti-government because I will not be tricked into cheering for violence to be used against innocent people. And you cannot be pro-government in any way, shape, or form, any size, any flavor, and not be condoning violent aggression against your fellow man. So, that's the kind of weirdo fringe freak that I am. And thankfully, I'm not the only one. I felt like the only one 27 years ago when I first became a voluntarist, and I knew basically nobody else who was like that. Now I know hundreds of thousands of people who are such weirdo fringe kook freaks that instead of democracy, they believe in consensus. Instead of law and order, they believe in actual justice. Instead of patriotism, they believe in actual freedom. And I hope, and I am very convinced that I will continue to see the growth of weirdo fringe freaks figuring this stuff out and embracing their inner voluntarist and choosing the actual moral choice that was already inside them and is buried under their authoritarian indoctrination until we aren't the weird fringe anymore. We're all of society except for a few psychopaths saying, but we're in charge. And the rest of us say, no, you're not. And then they have no power. So, watch the Jones Plantation if you haven't seen it. We all live on Jones Plantation. Thank you very much.
If you like this presentation from the 2023 Liberty on the Rocks conference in Sedona, we wanted to invite you to Liberty on the Rocks 2024, which will be held in Sedona on November 1st through 3rd, 2024. This year, the theme is the Voluntaryism Conference, and while many Americans will be getting ready to hold their noses and vote for the lesser evils in what we believe are easily rigged elections with black box voting machines and mail-in ballots, We are assembling the most prominent voluntarists on the planet to talk about how we can get all of the legitimate, non-redistributive services people want from government without the waste, fraud, abuse, and extortion. Join David Friedman, Larken Rose, Walter Block, James Corbett, Derek Brose, and myself and musical headliner Grant Presence Elman in Sedona, either in person or virtually, on November 1st through 3rd. Details at sedona.artofliberty.org.